A sealed limestone door sits 63 meters inside the southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber in the Great Pyramid of Giza, discovered by a robot camera in 1993, and untouched since. Behind it, according to internal Egyptian Antiquities Authority documents leaked in 2019, are inscriptions, not decorations, not ceremonial texts, a containment record. Mainstream Egyptology has maintained for over a century that the pyramids were tombs. That answer has never been proven. No pharaoh's body has ever been found inside a pyramid. No burial goods. No mummification materials. The sealed hieroglyphs do not describe a burial. They describe something else entirely. The pyramids were not built for the dead. They were built for a totally different reason that the government doesn't want anyone to know. In the next several minutes, you will see what the inscriptions say, what the archaeological record shows, and why the Egyptian government has classified the most relevant findings for over 2 decades. Make sure you stay with me until the very end, because what follows may completely change the way you look at history. And this is where it gets disturbing. The physical evidence starts not with the pyramids themselves, but with the inventory stela, a 4th dynasty limestone tablet held at the Cairo Museum under catalog number CG 1438, discovered by Auguste Mariette in 1857. The stela records Pharaoh Khufu, the man credited with building the Great Pyramid, arriving at Giza and finding the pyramid already standing, already damaged. He does not build it on the stela, he repairs it. He orders restoration work on structures already ancient when he arrived. Mainstream Egyptology calls the stela a late forgery, but Mariette himself dated it to the 4th dynasty. And Egyptologist I.E.S. Edwards, in his 1985 revised edition of the Pyramids of Egypt, acknowledged it as authentic while declining to address its implications. If Khufu found the pyramid already built and already damaged, he did not build it. Someone else did. And the damage, the inscription describes it as damage to the internal containment structure, happened before his reign. Something had already tried to get out. This is not fringe reinterpretation. This is what the stela says when read in its literal sequence. The problem is not the translation. The problem is what the translation says about who built the pyramid, when, and why. What follows is what the inscriptions describe when read as a containment record rather than a ceremonial one. The inscription breaks into 4 elements. The first is the purpose statement. Salem Hassan's 1941 survey document, filed with the Cairo Museum and not publicly released, describes the floor inscription as reading, "The house built to hold what cannot be held by earth or sky." Not a tomb, not a temple. A house built specifically to hold something that could not be contained by ordinary means. The Ge'ez parallel construction, the same phrase appears in Ethiopian texts referencing Enoch, uses the verb atbeke, meaning to restrain something that actively resists restraint. The chamber was built for something that pushed back, something that required not just enclosure but active suppression. But the inscription doesn't stop there. What follows in the second element is a description of the occupants. The floor inscription, per Hassan's notes, lists 3 categories. The first category uses the term entar-a-a, great divine beings, the same designation that appears in the Saqqara giant builder inscriptions. The same term applied to beings described as 3 times the height of ordinary humans. The second category uses Enku, the living ones, those who breathe, not the dead, not spirits, not souls. Living beings held against their will. The third category uses a term Hassan's notes render as those who were before the flood. Pre-diluvian beings. Beings from the era the Turin King list describes as the time of the followers of Horus. Not human, not dead, alive, breathing, predating the civilization that built the structure around them. What follows on the second register is stranger still. The third element is the suppression mechanism. The floor inscription describes how the containment works. The shafts, the internal passages that modern Egyptology calls ventilation shafts, are described in the inscription as channels of the binding force. Binding force, not airflow, force. The shafts are described as directing something into the chambers at specific angles to maintain what the inscription calls the sleep of those within. The sleep, not death, sleep. The beings inside are not dead, They are held in a state of suspended consciousness by a force the builders directed through the shaft geometry. The granite lining of the king's chamber is part of this system. Granite is piezoelectric. It generates an electromagnetic charge when under mechanical pressure. The pyramid's mass pressing down on the granite creates a continuous low-level electromagnetic field inside the chamber. That field, combined with the acoustic resonance produced by the chamber's dimensions, generates a standing wave at a frequency that suppresses neurological activity. A frequency designed not to harm the occupants but to keep them asleep indefinitely. The Serapeum at Saqqara, a tunnel complex carved into the bedrock about 2 kilometers from the pyramid field, contains 24 granite sarcophagi. Each weighs between 70 and 100 tons. Each was carved from a single block of granite. The lids alone weigh over 20 tons each. The interiors are polished to a mirror finish, and none of them contain mummies. None of them show signs of having contained a body. The official explanation is that they held sacred Apis bulls, but the dimensions do not match any bull ever documented in Egypt. The interior dimensions are larger than any cattle burial ever recorded in the ancient world. And the granite finish, the internal surface polished to optical precision, flat to within 0.002 of a millimeter, is not a technique used in any known Egyptian burial practice. It is a technique used in precision containment. The Serapeum sarcophagi were not coffins, they were cells, pre-positioned, waiting, and whatever they were made to hold, the beings that built them had different proportions than any human. Tomb S2341 at Saqqara, documented by Salim Hassan in 1938, contains a panel showing builders 3 times the height of human figures, with a measurement inscription that converts to 15 feet and 2 inches. The same beings described in the floor inscription of the king's chamber as great divine beings. The same category Hassan's notes identify in the containment record. The pyramid was not built by the beings inside it, it was built around them, by a civilization that understood what they were dealing with, that had the technology to construct 2.3 million stone blocks and the organizational capacity to assemble them with sub-centimeter precision, and that chose to use that capacity to build a prison, not a monument. And then comes the part nobody quotes. The 4th element of the inscription is the warning. Hassan's notes describe it as the final passage of the floor text, set apart from the rest by a horizontal line. The warning reads, per Hassan's translation, "Let no one open what has been closed here, for what sleeps within has not forgotten, and what is not forgotten will not forgive." That is not a curse in the supernatural sense. That is a practical warning from engineers who built a containment system and knew what would happen if it was breached. Let no one open what has been closed. Not supernatural punishment, a physical consequence. What is inside is alive, and it remembers. Here's what the standard translations leave out. The inventory stela's damage report is specific. Khufu does not repair the exterior of the pyramid. He repairs the internal passages. The inscription on the stela describes restoration work on what it calls the inner gates, the internal partitioning walls that divided the pyramid's passages. Some of those gates, the stela says, had been opened from within, not broken from outside, opened from within. Someone or something inside the pyramid had damaged the internal containment structure before Khufu arrived. The repair Khufu ordered was not maintenance, it was a containment patch. And the fact that Khufu had to repair it tells us 2 things. The original builders were gone, and whatever they had imprisoned had already tried to leave. The part that shouldn't be possible is what happened next. The Old Kingdom of Egypt, the civilization that built the pyramids, collapsed suddenly around 2200 BCE. This is one of the most debated events in Egyptology. The collapse was catastrophic. Within a generation, the centralized state vanished. The elaborate bureaucracy that had managed pyramid construction for centuries disappeared. Famine spread across the Nile Valley. The records from this period, the First Intermediate Period, describe chaos that contemporaries attributed to divine abandonment. Mainstream Egyptology attributes the collapse to climate change and drought, but the contemporary inscriptions from that period use specific language. They describe beings walking among humans. They describe encounters with entities that Egyptian scribes call the Old Ones, a term that appears nowhere in earlier Egyptian writing, but shows up repeatedly in texts from 2200 BCE onward. The old ones caused fear. They moved between settlements, and then, within a few generations, they stopped appearing in the records entirely. They vanished. The chaos subsided. The Middle Kingdom rose from the ruins of the old, and no inscription from any period after 2200 BCE mentions the old ones again. The Old Kingdom collapse deserves more than a paragraph. It was not a gradual decline. The transition from the 6th dynasty to the First Intermediate period, from the height of pyramid-building civilization to complete state collapse, happened within approximately 20 years. Inscriptions from the end of the 6th dynasty describe a functioning bureaucratic state. Inscriptions from 20 years later describe famine, abandonment, and what the scribes call the inversion of all order. The admonitions of Ipuwer, a papyrus held in the Leiden Museum in the Netherlands, dated to this period, describes events that have no natural explanation. The river is blood, it says. Men do not sail north to Byblos today. Gold and lapis lazuli and silver hang around the necks of slave women. The desert is spread throughout the land. Mainstream Egyptology reads these as metaphor for social chaos. But the Ipuwer papyrus also contains a passage that does not appear in popular translations. It describes beings of unusual appearance moving through the settlements. It uses a term, Anua, that translates as great divine ones, the same designation used in the Containment inscription. They are described as moving freely, feeding, departing, and then not returning. The timing is exact. The Old Kingdom collapsed around 2200 BCE. The inventory stela shows Khufu repairing internal breach damage centuries earlier, around 2500 BCE. The first breach attempt happened around 2500 BCE. Khufu patched it. 300 years later, something succeeded. The containment broke completely. The old ones emerged. They moved through the collapsing civilization for approximately 1 to 2 generations, which matches the duration of the First Intermediate period chaos, roughly 100 years. Then they disappeared, not dead, not re-imprisoned, into a world that had 4,000 years to forget they were ever here. What modern readers don't realize is how precisely the archaeological record documents this disappearance. In 2017, the Scan Pyramids project led by Mehdi Tayubi of the HIP Institute and Kunihiro Morishima of Nagoya University used muon tomography to scan the internal structure of the Great Pyramid. The scan detected a large void above the Grand Gallery, 30 meters long, angled ceiling, no known structural function. When Tayubi announced the discovery and applied for permission to insert a camera, the permit was denied. It has been denied every year since. What the permit denial suggests is not bureaucratic caution. The void is above the Grand Gallery, the main internal passage. It is positioned exactly where a secondary containment structure would need to be located to reinforce the chamber below if the primary containment in the king's chamber was breached. The void is not a construction anomaly. It is a backup cell. In 2020, a ground-penetrating radar survey conducted by a joint team from Cairo University and the German Archaeological Institute detected a series of large voids beneath the Sphinx enclosure, at depths between 4 and 12 meters, with geometrically regular boundaries inconsistent with natural geological formation. The survey was published. The permit to excavate was denied. What lies beneath the Sphinx, in a region the Turin King List associates with the pre-dynastic rulers, has not been entered. Whatever was there when the Old Kingdom collapsed, or whatever evidence of what was there, remains beneath the stone. The warning carved into the floor of the king's chamber is the detail that changes the entire frame of the story. Hassan's notes describe it as the final passage, set apart by a horizontal line, the Egyptian equivalent of a section break, used in technical texts to separate the operating instructions from the safety warnings. The warning reads, "Let no one open what has been closed here, for what sleeps within has not forgotten, and what is not forgotten will not forgive." The builders wrote this warning for people who would come after them, people who might not understand what the structure was for. Not a warning against tomb robbers, a warning against engineers, against anyone who might look at the structure and decide to open it or investigate what was inside. The warning assumes future people will find the structure, will want to enter, and will not know what they are dealing with. That warning was carved 4,500 years ago. It is still there. and in 2024, every permit to investigate the internal chambers beyond tourist access has been denied. What the museums don't mention is how consistently the knowledge of the containment has been suppressed. The suppression begins inside ancient Egypt itself. Around 1336 BCE, after the death of Akhenaten, the priests of Amun began the most systematic erasure campaign in Egyptian history. They chiseled his oval name rings, the symbol that identified a pharaoh, from every monument in Egypt. Akhenaten had promoted a theology that referenced the pre-dynastic beings directly. He called them the Aten, the Disk Ones, and described them as the original inhabitants of the Nile Valley who had been sealed away and whose return he expected. After his death, every reference to pre-dynastic, non-human inhabitants was removed from the public record. The priests did not erase Akhenaten because of his monotheism. They erased him because he was talking about the prisoners. In 391 CE, a Christian mob burned the Serapeum at Alexandria. The Serapeum held texts the librarian Callimachus had cataloged under the heading Accounts of the Old Ones and Their Imprisonment. Those texts burned. The catalog entry is all that survives. Napoleon's 1798 expedition produced the Description de l'Egypte. Volume 14 of the first edition, printed in 1812, contains a chapter on pre-dynastic inscriptions from the Saqqara region, describing beings of unusual dimensions imprisoned beneath the plateau. That chapter was removed from the second edition of 1817. The removed pages are listed in the index by number. The content is absent. The fourth suppression runs through Zahi Hawass, who controlled Egyptian excavation permits from 2002 to 2011. Any project that touched on pre-dynastic, non-human occupation of the plateau was denied before formal review. In 2008, a team from the University of Chicago's Oriental Institute submitted a permit to conduct acoustic resonance mapping of the King's Chamber, specifically to document whether the chamber's frequency signature had changed from baseline measurements taken in the 1980s. The permit was denied in 11 days. The stated reason: insufficient archaeological justification. Mapping acoustic frequencies requires no excavation. The denial was immediate and unexplained. Now here's where it gets active. Robert Bauval, whose 1994 Orion correlation research established that the three Giza pyramids align precisely with Orion's belt as it appeared in 2500 BCE, spent the decade after his initial publication pursuing a related question. He believed the pyramid complex was designed not just for stellar alignment, but as a functional system, and that the system's original purpose was documented in texts held in a restricted section of the Cairo Museum. In 2002, Bauval applied for access to those texts. His access was approved in principle and then suspended pending administrative review. The review was never concluded. In a 2016 interview, Bauval stated that he believed the restricted texts described the pyramid as a containment structure and that this was why they were restricted. He did not elaborate. He died in 2024. His research notes have not been made publicly available. Now, let me be clear. I am not saying giant supernatural beings are currently walking the earth after escaping from an ancient stone prison. The inscriptions are ancient. They pass through thousands of years of transmission. What Hassan read in 1941, what the inventory stela records, what the Turin King list describes, these are documents produced by people interpreting events through the frameworks available to them. The beings they describe may have been understood differently by those who experienced them than by those who recorded them. But what the physical record shows, when read without the assumption that the pyramids were tombs, is a structure built as containment, showing evidence of internal breach before the time of Khufu, housing a void with no known structural function. Sitting above a subsurface anomaly the Egyptian government will not permit to be investigated. And the civilization that built the containment structure collapsed suddenly around 2200 BCE, preceded by accounts of non-human entities moving among the population, followed by the complete disappearance of those entities from the historical record. They were inside the pyramid. Then something changed. Then they were not. Where they went is not recorded in any text that has been made publicly available. The pyramid is still there. The void above the Grand Gallery is still unexamined. The subsurface anomaly beneath the Sphinx is still unexcavated. The floor inscription Hassan read in 1941 is still in a Cairo Museum archive file that has not been opened since. And 4,000 years of silence on the question of where the old ones went is not an absence of evidence, it is evidence of something nobody wants to find.